Steve Harvey breaks down in tears after receiving a surprise message from Burkina Faso's president. It started like any other episode of The Steve Harvey Show. Steve walked onto the stage wearing his trademark bright smile, greeted by a thunderous round of applause. Full of his usual energy and charisma, he dove into the day's topic, the power of purpose. After sharing a moving story about his struggles growing up in poverty, the mood in the studio was already deeply reflective. But what happened next stunned everyone, including Steve himself. A production assistant hurried onto the stage, leaned in, and whispered something in Steve's ear. His expression shifted, first confused, then surprised, and finally silent. Turning to the camera, Steve cleared his throat and said, folks, I've just been told there's a very special message for me, and it's coming from somewhere I never expected, Burkina Faso. The screen behind him lit up with a golden seal and the bold words, "Message from President Ibrahim Traoré." The audience fell completely silent. No coughs, no whispers, just pure anticipation. Steve looked at the screen, visibly shaken. "Why would the president of Burkina Faso want to send me a message?" He said quietly. "I don't even know what this is about." He sat down slowly, eyes glued to the screen, his hands tightening on the arms of the chair. Then, the video began. It opened with a warm, simple setting, a wooden desk, the flag of Burkina Faso gently waving in the background. And then, President Ibrahim Traoré appeared. His eyes were strong yet kind, his voice steady and calm. "Mr. Steve Harvey," he began in English with a soft African accent. "I speak to you not just as a leader, but as a brother." The studio collectively leaned in. "You do not know me, but we know you," the president continued. "In the villages of Burkina Faso, your voice reaches farther than you may think. Your words of strength, of faith, of second chances have touched people you'll never meet." Steve blinked, stunned. His fingers trembled slightly. "During our darkest nights, when war threatened our peace, your story gave me hope," Traoré said, voice thick with emotion. "You reminded me that leadership is not about titles, but about purpose and heart." Silence fell again, deeper this time. Then came the line that broke Steve. "From a soldier who rose to lead his people," the president said, looking straight into the camera, "to a boy who once had nothing in America, I thank you." Steve opened his mouth, but no words came, just tears. He reached for a tissue, overwhelmed. The message continued. "I have watched you cry for others, laugh with strangers, give to those who thought they were forgotten," Traoré said gently. "In my country, we know that kind of heart. We call a heart of the sun, warm, brave, and giving light." Finally, Steve whispered, "Wow." The president paused and smiled. The message wasn't political. It was deeply personal. "I see in you the story of a man who never gave up," said the voice on screen. "And it reminds me never to give up on my people." As the message concluded, Traoré said something in more, the native language of Burkina Faso. Steve Harvey, overwhelmed, turned to his team, voice cracking. "What did he say at the end?" he asked. A nearby translator stood and replied softly. He said, "Even the strongest man needs to be reminded that his voice still matters." Steve covered his face. The crowd was crying. Even the cameraman's hands trembled. This wasn't just a televised moment. It was something sacred, a moment of connection between souls across oceans, across struggles, across brotherhood. And it was only just beginning. Steve sat in silence, hands folded, eyes glistening. The audience waited, breath held. But he couldn't speak, not yet. Something deep had touched him, a weight of truth, a feeling of finally being seen. After a long pause, Steve looked up. "You know, you never think your words go that far," he said. "You just try to be real, try to survive, try to help." Gentle applause began, but he raised his hand. "This ain't about applause. This is about purpose." Backstage, the producers whisper about cutting to commercial. Steve refused. "I want the world to hear every second of this. Don't stop the feed." Then the screen flickered. A second surprise. Live video, not pre-recorded. President Ibrahim Traoré of Burkina Faso appeared on screen. Steve gasped. Mr. Harvey, the president said, smiling warmly. For once, let me speak to you man to man, not from one country to another, but from one dreamer to another. The room went still. Emotion filled the space like a rising tide. You see me now as a president, Traoré said, leaning forward. But I was once a boy with no shoes. I walked barefoot to school. I tied my books with string. Many nights, I went to sleep hungry. Steve's head dropped, shoulders trembling. I saw war as a teenager, Traoré continued. I saw people give up, but I also saw people rise. One day in a crowded internet cafe, I saw your video, Don't Give Up. I didn't understand every word, but I understood your tears, your pain, and your hope. Steve looked up, stunned. You helped a young boy in Burkina Faso believe he could be more than his pain. That boy became me. The crowd gasped. Some cried openly. So, when I heard your voice again last week, speaking about purpose, I knew I had to speak back. Steve covered his face, overcome, but the president wasn't finished. You once said you wanted to visit Africa, not as a celebrity, but as a brother, as someone who wanted to give back. Steve nodded, whispering, Yes, I did. Traoré smiled. Then I invite you to Burkina Faso, not for cameras or attention, but to see what your voice has quietly built. The audience held their breath. There's an orphanage in Ouagadougou. The children there know your name. They pray with your words. They laugh at your jokes. But most of all, they believe they matter because you made them feel they did. Steve stood, tears flowing freely now. The audience rose with him, many wiping their eyes. And still, Traoré had more to say. In 7 days, they'll gather in the village square, waiting to meet the man whose words crossed oceans and healed hearts. The countdown had begun. The very next morning, Steve packed his bag. No cameras, no media alerts, just him, a carry-on, and a heart full of questions. The world watched as headlines blazed. President of Burkina Faso moved Steve Harvey to tears. But Steve wasn't chasing headlines. He was chasing purpose. Healed hearts. The countdown had begun the very next morning. Steve was already packing no cameras, no media alert, just a carry-on. And a heart full of questions. The world was buzzing. Every major news outlet ran headlines. President of Burkina Faso moved Steve Harvey to tears. A message that crossed oceans. Yet Steve wasn't going for the world. He was going for the kids. For that voice that had once spoken to his soul. As his plane soared over the Atlantic, he stared out the window, his thoughts drifting back to his childhood in Cleveland. The hunger, the hopeless nights, the dreams that once felt too big. Now, he was flying to Africa, summoned by a president who had once known that same pain. Whispering to himself, God, why me? He had no idea what to expect. Would the kids even recognize him? Would he be strong enough? In Burkina Faso, President Traoré stood in a sunlit courtyard before a sea of children. He's coming, he smiled. Cheers erupted. But in the back, a quiet girl named Isieche clutched a small notebook. She was 10, soft-spoken, wise beyond her years. Will he read it? Will he care? She whispered. Her caretaker smiled gently. He's already cared more than most. Isieche's letter was short, but it held a universe of truth. Dear Mr. Steve, my name is Isieche. My papa died 2 years ago. My mama is sick. Sometimes I cry at night. One day someone played your video. You said you were born to do something great. I believed you. Thank you for speaking to us, even if you didn't know we were listening. I hope you smile when you see us. Your little sister. Isieche as the sun set over Ouagadougou. Children sang songs and drew pictures with his name. Hope floated in the air. But Isieche sat quietly under the mango tree, notebook held close. This wasn't about fame or politics. It was a man who once slept in a car meeting a child who sometimes slept hungry. And the wind seemed to whisper. They were meant to find each other. When the plane landed, there were no cameras, no red carpet, just a dusty runway, a few guards, and a young aide holding a sign, Welcome, Brother Steve. His heart pounded as the van drove through humble streets, children waving with joy. But Nothing prepared him for what waited at the orphanage. Over 100 kids held signs. You matter. Thank you, Mr. Steve. We love you. Tears welled in his eyes. President Traoré greeted him with a warm embrace, wearing simple clothes, not a suit. Welcome home, he said. Steve couldn't speak. Then a voice. Steve? Steve. It was ACHA. She walked forward, notebook trembling in her hands. This is for you, she whispered. He knelt, read the letter, and wept, openly. Every soul there knew this wasn't a visit. It was destiny. Backstage later, during a commercial break, Steve sat in silence. The televised message from President Traoré had just ended. A producer handed him a paper, an English translation. You want to read this part, she said. At the bottom, one line stood out. When I was a young boy hiding beneath my grandmother's market table, I heard her say, even a broken voice can call the world a hope if it speaks from truth. Small flags. Others simply smiled wide with wonder. Steve watched them, heart full, eyes misty. It wasn't a fanfare or the fame. It was a recognition, not a celebrity, but of a man who had once struggled just like them. A man who had cried in the dark and now was a beacon of light. They arrived at a modest building with peeling paint and laughter echoing through the walls. It was a community center built by President Traoré's foundation, a safe place for orphaned and displaced children. As Steve stepped inside, dozens of kids turned to him, some clapping, others too shy to speak. But then a familiar small voice called out, Mr. Steve. It was ACHA. She ran forward, notebook in hand, eyes bright with a kind of joy only a child who's been seen and heard can carry. Steve knelt down as she handed him another page, this one freshly written. Dear Mr. Steve, you came. I knew you would. My mama is smiling today. I feel it. I don't cry at night so much now, because you show me that voices matter. Even little ones like mine. Thank you for being my brother. Love. ACHA. Steve read it aloud, voice cracking again. He didn't try to stop the tears this time. He looked around the room and finally understood. This wasn't a story about charity or fame or even success. It was about belonging, about a circle of pain and purpose finally closing. Later that evening, as the stars blanketed the Burkina sky, Steve sat beside President Traoré under a mango tree, the same one ACHA had sat beneath. They didn't speak for a long time. Finally, Steve broke the silence. I think this is the most important thing I've ever done. Traoré smiled gently. Then maybe it's just a beginning. And somewhere in that quiet corner of the world, two men, one from Cleveland, one from Ouagadougou, shared not just a conversation, but a calling. Not just a visit, but a vow that when voices meet across oceans, they don't just echo, they heal. Hand-drawn signs with Steve's name filled the air, but their first stop wasn't the palace. It was a small, weathered market, rows of wooden tables covered with fruits, spices, and colorful cloth. President Traoré led Steve to the very back. This, he said, pointing to a collapsed stall, was my grandmother's. Right here is where I listened to you on the radio while helping her count coins. Steve looked down at the dirt, speechless. The president knelt, picked up a small rock, and placed it in Steve's palm. This is where hope began. Steve couldn't hold it anymore. He cried silently, and so did Traoré. Next, Traoré guided Steve to a humble village, an hour outside the capital. As the car rolled to stop, a group of women waited under a tree. One of them, elderly and slow-moving, stepped forward, her hands trembling slightly. This is Awa, Traoré said. She's the only one still alive who used to sit with my grandmother during market days. She remembers you. Steve looked confused. But how? Traoré smiled. They didn't understand your English, but they felt your joy. Awa used to say, that man has a heart that speaks louder than his tongue. Awa stepped closer. The translator gently repeated her words. You made the hard days feel lighter, my sister, she said. Your voice gave her courage to keep selling when she wanted to give up. Steve knelt, tears falling again. Awa placed her hand on his cheek and whispered something and more. The translator choked as he translated. She said, my sister would have fed you if she had met you. She would have called you her son. In that moment, Steve Harvey wasn't a celebrity. He was a son, being welcomed home by a mother he never knew he had, and the world watched, speechless. That evening, Steve was invited to a small school. No cameras, no lights, just soft drums and nervous little faces. As Steve entered, the children began to sing, a simple tune and more. The translator leaned in and whispered, "It's a song President Traoré's grandmother used to hum while cooking at her market stall. Now these children sing it in her honor." Steve froze. "I remember this," he whispered. "My grandma in Cleveland, she used to hum something like this when I cried." Tro stood beside him, arms folded gently. "Our grandmothers, they gave us the same comfort, thousands of miles apart." Steve sat on a dusty bench, surrounded by children. One little girl handed him a wooden carving, two hands holding a heart. He broke, openly, loudly. Years of pain, years of questions, all released in a place he never expected. The boy from Ohio, the boy from Ouagadougou. Now two men, bound by a love no script could write. Before Steve's return flight, President Traoré asked for one last meeting. This time at a quiet plot of land just outside the capital. A tree stood in the center, surrounded by blooming sunflowers. Traoré handed Steve a rolled-up certificate, tied with a red ribbon. "This land," he said, "now belongs to you. It's a place of peace. A gift from Burkina Faso. So whenever you feel tired or lost, you have a home here." Steve shook his head, overwhelmed. "I didn't come for a gift. I came because your letter made me feel human again." Traoré nodded. "And you made my people feel seen. That is worth more than gold." They stood silently under the tree, the wind brushing their faces. Then Traoré did something no one expected. He knelt and placed his hand over Steve's chest. "I don't kneel for many," he said, "but I kneel for hearts that change lives." Steve fell to his knees too, and together, two powerful men cried like little boys who missed their grandmothers and found each other in the pain. The next day, Steve's return to the U.S. was met with silence. He asked for no fanfare, no cameras, no show, but something had changed. On his next broadcast, before beginning the show, Steve walked on stage holding the wooden carving the children gave him, the one with the two hands holding a heart. He placed it gently on his desk. Then he looked into the camera. "In my life, I've received many awards, many gifts, but none like this." His voice cracked. "I met a man, a president, not just of a country, but of the human heart." Ibrahim Traoré reminded me of something I forgot, that love, honor, and memory are stronger than anything fame can give you. He paused. "He called me a son of Africa. I call him my brother." And then Steve did something rare. He played the children's song, live. No translation. Just pure, innocent voices. Millions watched. Millions cried. Comments flooded in from every corner of the world. People didn't see politics. They saw love. They saw legacy. They saw healing. Dear viewers, if this story touched your heart even just a little, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below one word. Healed. Let's spread this feeling to the whole world. One story, one tear, one heart at a time.